Look, she fixed it already.
Okay, we're live. Oh, it looks like we're live on Facebook too. I think she reconnected us. Thanks, Janice.
Greetings. We're so happy to be with you, creating Zola Mondays Nation. Yes, we're happy to be back live and well. And I am Linda James Myers, and we have our brilliant panelist as well as a return panelist who's now a brilliant author. Is going to be our guest for today. And the substance has to do with the urgency of Maroon psychology. And he will be explaining more about that. But I think most of you who are listening at this juncture know we are the Maroons. And we've been about psychology for quite some time. But the urgency now is off the hook, as they used to say. So anyway, welcome. I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves. Shall we start with our elder?
That would be me. Thank you. I am Dr. Harvey Linder. I'm a clinical psychologist in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And
Thank you.
Why don't I pass it on to Dr. Wango?
Hey y'all, Dr. Onwanga here. Happy to be back. It seems like we take like a little hiatus and to be back with Dr. August to speak with us today and just like be in community. I'm gonna pass it to William.
Hey y'all, I'm William, Healing Circle facilitator, also youth educator, and I'm just honored to be in such brilliance. I would say Black brilliance, but it's just brilliance that I'm able to be surrounded with. So,
thank you.
And I'll pass it to Dr. JoJo.
Thank you. I'm really excited as well. I'm Dr. Jonisha Hickson. I'm a school psychologist in Washington, D.C., and also the newly minted D.C. ABC chapter president. So really excited to be here with Dr. August. That book, I read the foreword, and it was phenomenal. So I'll pass you the mic.
Thank you. This is exciting. This feels like coming back to family. I mean, I saw you a few months ago. But this is great. So my name is Dr. Evan August. I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist, and I do my work through the lens of Black liberation psychology. I'm the director of the Asili Collective at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, where we study the psychological consequences of structural anti-Blackness through menticide and other psycho-legal frameworks. And I'm here to chat about, this is my first time holding it up on screen, what we just published with Springer. And I'll do this on the Instagram and the Facebook. The price on Springer.com is too much. So if you need the hookup, please reach out to me. Please, we'll figure something out for you, because it's important that people read a lot of people's work. But this is The Carceral State, Forensic Psychology and Black Resistance, Let Them Not Be Forgotten. It's an edited volume where I pulled together a lot of community leaders, radical Black psychologists to help envision how we pull the science and the activism and the movement of today to help us get us free and also build the care and justice networks that we need for longevity, right? And I can tie all that back into Maroon psychology, but right now, that's my introduction. That's who I am.
Excellent. The Carceral State, Forensic Psychology and Black Resistance. Do we need to know about that and understand that? And can you say more, Evan, about, for those viewers who may not be aware, what you mean by the carceral state? Although I think at this juncture, most people realize this is a carceral state, particularly since we have the military coming into our citizens and
exactly
harassing them.
And so I feel like it's the multiple threads, right? It's the aspects of carcerality, of prison, of capture that people recognize. So people recognize the prison, people recognize, or they should be continuing to recognize, what ICE represents in our communities. But there's also the many ways it's embedded itself in our communities in ways that we don't always see. I know people who are familiar with the work of Black psychology would be more familiar, but the state hospital, right? The standard hospital at sites of carcerality also, where we invisibilize people and call it care, right? A lot of people do work to talk about how, right, school-based systems can also shape, right, carcerality. So much of the way that the US understands care or education are through these lenses of coercion and capture. And we've gotten to this place right now where I'm in New York City right now. I'm teaching at John Jay, where a lot of New York City's police force goes through, and the police budget is $11 billion, right? That's our primary mechanism, our primary mode of showing up for community, right? And so that's what we mean when we're talking about the carceral state. We've had such a tremendous pouring of our resources into these mechanisms of violence. Right?
Absolutely. Uh-oh.
I know you are a forensic psychologist, but I take it your book is for other people except beyond people who are studying to be forensic psychologists, who are aspiring to be forensic psychologists. So can you tell us a little bit about the utility of your book and the topic for people who are not particularly forensic psychologists?
It's a great question. It's one of my favorite questions, and it's one of the pieces of pushback I've gotten on the book so far. Some really great people, where they'll look at the book and they say, I don't understand myself as a forensic psychologist. The way I think about forensic psychology is contributing to advancing these criminological projects, right? I think about forensic psychologists. I think about somebody who maybe is training the police force. I think about somebody who is breaking apart families. I think about somebody who's in the prisons helping grease those wheels. And what I think is really important is for us to also have agency in shaping how we think about forensic psychology. Forensic psychology broadly, the broad definition, the most broad, is the intersection of psychology and law. That's it. And I've been surprised the degree to which so many Black psychologists, this other radical paradigm of Black psychology, that emerged at the same time as forensic psychology. A lot of people don't know that. It's the same conference, right? The same conference where those Black psychologists stormed the stage at APA is the same conference where you had about 14 lawyers and psychologists formulate forensic psychology. A lot of the work of Black psychology is also about how can we intervene on the state apparatus, right? You look at some of the earliest projects, some of the earliest works is how can we get our people who've been captured and get them free? We've allowed other people to define forensic psychology. So now they have all the political positioning to shape these outcomes when we know our discipline has better research, is better theorized about the people that they're most likely going to be working with, right? And so I say I want more people to embrace that, right? Understand that your work, the science that you do can shape these outcomes, and so take on that burden, right? And so you're exactly right. I will say this. A lot of the people in here, some of them aren't even psychologists, some of them are community health workers, but they're doing the work of building community violence interruption programs, community-based healing circles as forms of restorative justice, right? These are also using our lineages to shape justice, and that's what it should be.
Absolutely true. I think about my own career and when I used to practice private practice, and I used to do evaluations for incarcerated Black people who needed evaluation on a federal level. And it's so important to put yourself in that position because you can make a difference between someone being put to death or sentenced for an extraordinarily long time. Also, just going into the prison system and reaching out to those men and women who have been incarcerated and help liberate their minds and help them understand how they got where they are because of this, what did you call it, coercion and capture, so to speak, is so important. So I think the two are very much integral. It's just that people typically don't think in that way.
Exactly. I think that's the piece. When I was talking to people about Maroon psychology, which we could talk a bit about, being a Black forensic practice, it was making that material commitment, right? Because a lot of people here, we've written so powerfully and so truthfully about the conditions of our people. We've written brilliant theory about what these conditions do. But sometimes I feel like we become a bit divorced from the material commitments. Like now that we know what's going on, we have to follow up on that commitment and help get people out, right? We have to follow through on that. And so the forensic piece makes sure we're grounded in our material commitments to the people who have been captured.
Interestingly, and not to overtake the conversation, but interestingly, The first people that I engaged to test my theory were incarcerated Black men who were in prison for violence and substance abuse. And they are probably one of the best audiences in terms of getting it that I've ever had. It was easy peasy. And they were so grateful.
That's it. That's it.
I love the connection you made, Dr. August, between your book and like, I think that it's so arbitrary for us to have these like discipline specific lines, which I think I've heard Baba Nobles talk about, right? We're all doing pretty much the same thing in different arenas. And so I remember when I was in grad school, I did externship at a school and I was like, oh, I love working at the school, but it's so overwhelming. Like, I don't think I'll ever come back. Like, it's just too, like, the system is way too stressed from the teachers, the scholars, the parents, everybody. But lo and behold, I found myself working back at a school because I thought, right, this is where I can do some disruption of that school to prison pipeline before, right, our scholars maybe enter that system. And it wasn't until I came back to the schools that I learned that there was a special education to prison pipeline. And on Friday, I actually, we had a scholar here at my school who was having a lot of difficulties just accessing the general education curriculum. And even with all the accommodations in place of his IEP, he still was not like, this wasn't the proper setting for him. So I visited another school that was more clinically based. And they had a room that like freaked me out. It looked like a hole. It looked like a hole that you would see in a prison. And they were like, yeah, this is where the scholars come when they are being physically aggressive. And it's like, I get it, but also like that did something to me. And I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I want to send my scholar here if you have a place like this. The walls were drab. It was literally like a 4x4 box. Like, it was very disheartening. So like the implications of your work and how it can be applied to different disciplines of psychology and even just in the general public is just, I think, understated. And I can't really wait to read the whole book when I get my coins together, you know.
I sent you the
PDF. I'm in the state of Oregon, and here recently in 2025, they actually made it easier to put holds on people, to where before it was you had to be presenting an imminent danger to yourself or others, and now they've taken away some of those requirements, which is going to make it easier to coerce people into getting treatment. And so I was curious if you could speak to some of the unintended consequences that could happen for our people specifically, with these with it becoming more lax.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. So I'm thinking three things. The first of which is we're seeing that in a lot of major cities, right? Even as, again, the rhetoric around violent crime, even as that continues to trend downwards in a lot of major cities, you still see a lot of conservative think tanks elevating all what they're calling disorder on the streets, which tends to be unhoused Black people, perhaps living with madness, right? Perhaps living with some type of mental illness, right? And they're using the bodies, they're using people's distress to motivate increasing all these, again, carceral technologies, right? Increasing the capture of people to these state hospitals where I was driving back to New York from DC, and I happened to pass across Kirby, where I did my last externship when I was a trainee. And the type of what they would call care in that place vicariously traumatized me, right? And there's a lot of global organizations now that are noting that there are a series of human rights abuses that go on in a lot of these state and forensic-based hospitals, right? This is not a one-off. These are systematic types of abuse that go on, and that people tend not to care about because they'd rather these people be, right, incarcerated than on the street, right? Because people think any type of disorder, anything that they perceive to be erratic, to be scary, right? And so that's to your question about like what's the downstream effect. It's twofold. One, we know that doesn't make people safer. That doesn't make people better, right? Like that method of erasing people, placing people in places that they might find absolutely terrifying, then throwing them back on the streets, that does nothing to shape the rate at which people seem or attain wellness, right? Their definition of wellness. That's the first thing. The second thing, and Kalechi, who writes the last chapter in the book, she's somebody with lived experience, having been psychiatrically institutionalized, writes to this very powerfully. It's also not an effective method for the state either, right? The research has been done, right? These community-based forms of care, these outpatient-based forms of care, right? They're not only more effective at creating health and wellness, they're also more cost-effective. So it's one of these pieces where we allow these conservative think tanks to animate nightmares about the people that we're supposed to be in community with. And not only is it more violent, it's more expensive, and it doesn't make us safer. So that's all the downstream effects. We allow this anti-Blackness to make all our communities more dangerous.
It's so very interesting. In the 70s, when people who were in mental institutions were put out, they became the people without housing. And of course, that didn't decrease the population, it's increased the population. And now people are afraid of the unhoused, and now they want to put them back into institutions, but without treatment, without appropriate treatment, I should say it that way. So it's kind of a cycle. And when you look at the cycle over time, what you see, there seems to be an inherent intention to disavow people of their humanity. And until we can wake up to that and then begin to implement strategies and systems that can disrupt that, then the cycle will keep repeating. So we'll have them now back housed again, but not in a way that's delivering health, but in a way that probably will make their issues worse.
Exactly. And I want to name this really quick. I saw Will unmuted, and I think Robina had unmuted also. I opened up the book in the introduction by talking about a story my mom shared about an unhoused man in her rural town of Virginia named Isom. Isom, everybody knew him as, the kids knew him as like the forest man because everybody thought he lived in the forest. And she, again, my mom lived in deep country, Virginia, right on the border of North Carolina. And everybody knew every Sunday when everybody was at church, he'd be going into people's houses and trying to eat food and whatnot. What was fascinating to me is the way people received that person, right? The people knowing that he was going into houses, as opposed to locking the door, as opposed to getting a night watch, they made extra food, right? They would make an extra pie, they would make extra chicken and leave it on the windowsill because they knew he was going to be coming by. Because everybody knew him, they were in community with him nonetheless, right? And I contrast that with what happens with Jordan Neely in New York City, who's on the subway asking for food, asking for water in a really aggressive way, right? In a way of a desperation. I don't want to say aggressive, in a way of desperation, and he gets placed in a chokehold and killed, right? That shows the different politics of communities. When we look at those small Black towns, I think Kobe Cambone talks about those small rural Black towns as nonetheless African towns. We see that politics of community, we see that politics of justice, we see that politics of care. When you come to a place like the New York City, where anti-Blackness animates so much of what people think community is supposed to be, you meet that same desperation with death, right? I think it's a terrible shame that we haven't been able to build our community on the logics, on the politics of our ancestors, because we know this would be more effective.
It's so interesting because I remember in the 70s, early 70s, when I first went to Jamaica, you'd see people on the street and they would say, "Oh, sufferation." We'd call it mental illness. They called it sufferation. I think that kind of awareness, I don't think it's still there now, the last time I checked, but it was beautiful to see that the people attributed the situation to its real cause. And if you can understand the real cause, then you can also come up with the best treatment. But I don't know that we've ever come to that place in this country.
Exactly.
Something I was thinking about when you were talking about Donna Linda, you called it like that, them stripping us of our humanity and dignity. I see that as like a thread that connects what we talk about with Maroon psychology and the freedom of that practice and today's resistance or attempts for us to resist in the realities of like the state surveillance, policing, ICE raids that are targeting Black and Brown communities. And I'm curious about your perspective of what it means to cultivate Maroon spaces of safety and healing and sovereignty when all of this is going on around us, especially because it's, even as you said, in that setting that you were in, you kind of were you were experiencing vicarious trauma. So all that surveillance and what we're seeing online is reenacting these historical traumas of capture for us, especially as Black folks, today witnessing that and then questioning, like, what can life look like? How do we get past this again?
That's a brilliant question. So the first thing I want to name, because I just gave a presentation on the Maroons and Maroon psychology yesterday at a decolonial workshop. And it surprised me actually that not everybody was familiar with the legacy of the Maroons. And so I want to name a few different books I highly recommend, or scholars. I recommend people check out Vincent Brown, Tacky's Revolt, Black Marxism by Cedric Robinson, A Decolonial History of the Haitians by Jean Casimir, any of Gerald Horne's work. There's one person I was thinking of that I'm escaping. Julius S. Scott, A Common Wind. Because what a lot of these books thread together is, when you think about the Maroons, you think about what's going on, JoJo Scholar? When you think about the Maroons, you think about those first African peoples who were brought here, but as opposed to trying to refine or reform the conditions of chattel enslavement, they formed their own communities in radical rejection, at times in solidarity with First Nation peoples. Right. And this is not an isolated incident. You had places in Haiti, in Jamaica, in Cuba, throughout the US, right, where people fought and won and were able to create bordered places of resistance, right, where people could not go in. Right. The Coromantee in Jamaica, people could not go in and traffic those people because they fought and they won. What a lot of people think about with these things, again, they think about these as if they're isolated revolts. What Julius S. Scott's work shows is throughout the islands, there was a tapestry, a whisper network, such that people from different islands, people from different communities were able to discuss their different battle strategies, discuss news from all over the world globally, sometimes in ways that beat their European channels of information. Right, such that a very clear example of this, when you think about the Haitian Revolution, a lot of people don't know, for example, shout out Kenneth Bruce saying slavery is exiles. Great example. The Haitian Revolution was started in part by Boukman Dati, who was somebody who was enslaved in Jamaica and was brought over to Haiti. Right, so you had these different interconnections of enslaved Africans and freed Africans who fought for freedom. Asa Hilliard defines marronage as freedom with the purpose of cultural continuity, right? Not freedom without purpose, freedom for the purpose of cultural continuity. So I thread all of that together with this idea of what does it mean for us to engage in marronage as psychologists. We know psychology has a particular political positioning. We know that our assessments, we know that our therapies, we know that our practice is able to deliberately and directly shape legal outcomes, right? We can write a report that gets somebody out of prison. We can write a report that gets somebody out of a hospital, right? And we know we can contribute to the co-creation of other spaces, other worlds, right? Different spaces of justice, different spaces of care. So how this threads together right now in this context of ICE, right? In this context of surveillance states, cop cities, it means that we have to be very clear-eyed that these are not spaces that we can reform. Right. I know a lot of people who are doing this work in the VA, and some people who are doing this work at the NYPD. Right? These are not places that we can hope to reform because they have a particular political agenda, again, of coercion and capture. What we need to be putting our energy into is that through the lens of the radical school of Black psychology is the creation of novel spaces that have our politics at the center of life. Right. And so what we do in the book really quickly is, I don't want this to be theory. Every person here is a practitioner of that. So I go through the legacy of Thomas Hilliard, who did this work in terms of contributing to Angela Davis's trial to getting her free, right? Who contributed to the San Quentin Six, some of George Jackson's comrades, and getting them out of solitary confinement, right? We have Lori Banfield, who talks about her work with redemption housing, right? To help people who are coming out of prison kind of undo the wounds of disenfranchised grief. Right? Again, we have Jean Semaphore in shout out Jersey, in Jersey with the Patterson Healing Collective. We're doing a lot of
Jersey. Sorry.
right, radical violence interruption that has, in some ways, some research shows is more effective than policing. So everybody in here has a practice that they engage in that is beneficial to our community, that's rooted in our politics, right? And that's what we need to engage in now when we see this ever expanding wave of state violence.
One of the things I think is important too, Evan, is to not create a false dichotomy between the theoretician and the practitioner, because every theoretician should have been at first a practitioner, so that they would know what was problematic and what needed to be solved and how it can be solved. So I think that's important. I don't, not to say every theoretician has had that background, but I think a good theory has got to be grounded in reality, and you have to have been engaged in that reality. I guess what I'm most interested in now is this idea of Maroon psychology, and certainly ABC could be considered safe place for Maroon psychologists. But how do we get that interconnectedness internationally that used to exist? We really need to be so tied into the Caribbean, to the continent, to everywhere people of color, and particularly people acknowledging African descent, are. Do you see that happening? And if so, how can we support it?
I think it's a great question. And I think it's bizarre because in a way we are both more connected, right? I can talk to somebody from anywhere in the world, but again, politically disconnected, right? How much can my political will help shape somebody else's political vision in different places? And so I think to your point about the theory as practitioner, I think you also know, you probably know a lot of people who their theory is not based in practice, right? There's a lot of people who that is the case of. And part of why I want to write the book, honestly, is because especially after 2020, I saw a lot of brilliant people writing a lot of books condemning racism in the field, which is like fantastic. I wrote one of those articles. A lot of us wrote one of those articles, like essentially it had to be done, but I didn't see enough people engaging in the practice of helping people shape an other practice, right? That was materially liberatory. And so I'm saying all that to say, that's where it starts for me, right? So Nana Linda, you've been in some of our meetings with Nadej and IET. That's one of the ways that we're conceptualizing this work through Maroon psychology, right? Our healing circles there aren't meant to solely help people deal with psychological distress, although that is important. It also operates as a vehicle of community reconciliation and transformative justice as people come out of different paramilitaries and gangs, as people think about their politics. We're collecting an archive of stories for people to use to advocate on the global stage. So that's how I think about it, right? Shout out to Robina, just leading some healing circles for people in the Kenyan diaspora. Right? That's where it has to start. Like we've written, again, I also want to say that I think we're blessed because we've had so many fantastic theorists lay the groundwork. And now I think we're called upon to take that next step is let's put this into practice, right? Let's go South Africa, let's go Ethiopia, let's go Kenya, let's go Haiti, let's go Jamaica, and put this into practice and connect the people who are doing this in practice.
Absolutely true.
I'm gonna do
well, if nobody has anything else to say,
I'm gonna do a small plug actually, because the Journal of Africana Studies just put out a special issue that me and my lab just had a publication in, where we talk about that, like the cultivation of Pan-African consciousness in 3 different contexts as examples of how to fight forward. So we have some students from Uganda, from Egypt, and from Haiti all meditate on the material practice of cultivating African consciousness towards liberation.
Absolutely great. And I think one of the things that I've been interested and involved in, actually due to you, Evan, is working with the Garvey Institute in terms of African-centered education and bringing that consciousness to broad swath of people acknowledging African ancestry throughout the diaspora. And I think that's key. And I think it's also important that that whole mental bondage we have that buys into that fragmented view that I think JoJo spoke to earlier relative to how we divide psychology. You're a social psychology, you're this, you're that. as we move to an African-centered Maroon psychology, hopefully we'll bring to that cultural awareness that fragmentation isn't helping us. Exactly. If I have a mental health problem, it's not my problem, it's the community's problem, and it's a larger social context. And that way I think we can build out so that as a psychologist, I'm not reluctant to address political issues or other cultural issues, but rather understanding that health isn't fragmented. My health and sustainable well-being is totally dependent on from the cellular level to the cosmic. So,
exactly. And that's the thing I want to anchor really quickly is as people are engaged in this practice, it's also making sure you're grounded in not just I guess being brave enough to engage in political conversation, but like being grounded in a politic, right? Like the people who were protesting Stop Cop City, a lot of those people were grounded in a particular form of anarchism, right? You have a lot of people who are grounded in the radical Black feminism of the Combahee River Collective. You have some people, like a lot of these students who engaged in the encampments were engaged in a intercommunalism shaped by the Black Panthers, right? So as we engage in political movement, making sure people are also grounded in a real understanding of politics and what they're moving towards.
That's very interesting that you make that point, because one of the things that is problematic is, for me, it's not grounded in this, that, or the other political persuasion. Are you grounded in moral and ethical behavior? Are you grounded in a spiritual awareness that helps you see your relationship? Mm-hmm. And I think if we can somehow put that at the forefront, then all these other demarcations that we're used to adopting based on the fragmented view will dissipate and we really have unity. Was that one of your scholars, Jojo?
I love it.
Yeah, I have 2 externs here and they're using my office, so I keep trying to find spaces and all the babies.
I love it. I love that. So what I want to also uplift, Natalinda, I love that you made this point, because that's chapter 2. So chapter 2 is a psychopolitical comparison of ethics for different practices. And it mentions like the different forms of morality, whether they be rooted in Mayat, Egyptian mystery system, right? Or I think one is Ifa. Someone talks about agape, but the different forms of moral depth that is necessary for these movements. So they say, though that the exact point you're making, this kind of moral clarity is necessary if you want to engage in a kind of Pan-African project, is what they name.
Excellent. I think that the more we can point to the roots, because even after if we start from the roots, then we can see the evolution of all these other spiritual disciplines or religious ideas. So it's looking good. I'm so happy.
As a Black person who lives in Oregon and is very active in activism and has to navigate in some of these anarchist spaces, like you mentioned before, selfishly, I'm curious how one can take these lessons and apply them to these majority white spaces to kind of bring them back to that Black Panther lineage without giving away the secret recipe, without giving away the secret sauce.
Yeah, that's a dope question. I'm sure everybody has different thoughts on it. Mine is, and I always pull from Natalinda, and I'm sorry if you don't say this, Natalinda. I've been telling people I pull it from you when I say it, but what she's saying, right, is when you think about the foundational aspect of, you know what I remember this from? It's when we had our episode years ago with Frank Wilderson, and y'all were wrestling with the conception of Blackness, right? Frank Wilderson's idea of Blackness as rooted in the non-humanness of being, and Natalinda's anchoring it within the knowledge of all different types of things, like the fundamental truth that we're moving towards. And so when I say Black psychology, and I name it in that paper, that's how I think about it. We're talking about a fundamentally true kind of indigenous relationship to consciousness. And so I'm saying that all to say, because of that, because of when you're moving through a moral truth, when you look at a lot of the more, I would say, radical Black movements, even in the US, a lot of them actually had white people who are moving through that consciousness as well. So if you look at Asada, for instance, right, we just lost Asada, who got to transition while free, which is a beautiful thing, right? There were white people who are part of the Black Liberation Army who played a central role in her liberation because they were clear-eyed about their consciousness and what they were doing it for, right? In a similar fashion, I think Orasami Burton talks about this tip of the spear with the Attica Revolt. Again, he names not everybody who engaged in that revolt was Black, but they engaged nonetheless in a Black consciousness, right? Similar, when you look at the Uhuru movement that was raided by the FBI, 2 of the 3 people who were, I believe, charged were members of their Solidarity Committee, right? So I think naming for people that this is a consciousness that's rooted in a fundamental moral truth that we want to move towards, right? And having people be clear about that, because I do know there's some political space in which people seek to kind of almost disregard the entirety of the question of whether it be culture or spirit, because they don't think that's like theoretically expedient for their political vision. But I think history would demonstrate that's not true.
Absolutely. Dr. Robina, do you have a comment?
No, I'm just so proud. I'm just listening to you speak, and I'm like, wow, this is so. Like, obviously, I have these conversations with y'all on the side, but yeah, I think that's really what I was thinking as I'm listening to that. Hello, scholar. And just the connections, I think for me that I've been trying to make are how to put it into practice, because I'm not actively in academia anymore. I mean, I still consider myself a researcher, and I love to just like take in the information that is coming from folks who care about us and are coming up with theories and brilliant ideas for us to put into practice. So that's kind of where I'm most focused on right now, is how to put those things into practice. And because I practice from the lens of like a organizational psychologist and like a leadership coach now, that's typically where my mind is going towards, because I'm like, those are the people that are now who influence the system, are in control of a lot of things that then trickle down and impact us within the work setting. And I don't know that I haven't heard people refer to the world of work as a carceral system, but I think the way that it operates a lot, like within corporate settings, there are a lot of similarities that I pull from that and my experiences there of being like vicariously traumatized, and the way that particularly like white leaders show up in those spaces and use that power against Black people, to where now we, have a lot of numbers that are thrown around, and even just proven just from government shutdowns of like 300,000 plus Black women being pushed out or exiled from the workspace. And we're already at a disadvantage in terms of how much we're making. So now thinking, how is that impacting families? Because we take care of a lot of people when we have for ourselves. We're always putting other people before ourselves. So that's the space that I'm sitting in, is just thinking about that, and always open to conversations about that and how other people are making sense of it and what folks are doing in their daily lives to make things better for themselves and the people around them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I was intrigued the other day. I read a white historian who's written a book about slavery as a model for capitalism. Mm-hmm. So he's saying that when people are saying, oh, slavery is past, he's saying, no, it's not. It's the model that's being implemented from then to today, and it's alive and well. And I would be interested in the thoughts of you all around that premise. You triggered that in me, Dr. Robina, when you talk about being working with leaders in the corporate setting and that kind of thing. That probably would shock them.
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't shock them. That it should not at all. But I actually talked about, which we should probably do like an episode on this and invite some other folks who actually are in academia studying this, which I'm thinking of a person, but the African-centered approach to organizational psychology and running, not running, but operating within like systems like that. But one thing that I was thinking about when you mentioned the capitalism aspect is there's also some writings on like the pillars of white supremacy. And I believe genocide is one of those as well. So there's like capitalism, genocide, like those things are required in order to keep it going. And now I think we're seeing it fall apart in the sense of a lot more people are speaking up about how it doesn't make sense. You know, at one point it was sounding all like conspiracies, conspiracy theories that this is going on here and that's happening. But because we're able to see things live with the power of social media and also people just becoming more vocal because it's getting closer and closer to their home. So it's harder to ignore it. I think that their plans are falling apart in a way because we can't deny some of those things. You know, them taking books off the shelves, yes, that's going to impact people for generations to come. But as Black people, we've always been able to make space to share information through our, you know, oral skills, our communities that we create for ourselves, affinity groups. Like we've always found a way to still share information and pass it down. And unfortunately, sometimes that means that it's not recorded or able to be found in like a material way. But I think those are ways that we can continue to preserve our wisdom, speak up our ancestors and the power and wisdom they always had and shared with us in the fight. And yeah, I think it's in every space. So they should not be surprised that we peep it.
Absolutely true. Are there any questions coming from our audience? I can't tell.
I just wanted to ask one last question before we went to the audience, if that was okay, Donna Linda. And I wanted to make a statement before I made this question. So in Oregon, they had Measure 110. It failed terribly. They decided to make it where if you get caught with drugs, you can either go to prison or jail or go into these diversion programs. They call it deflection. And so right now in Oregon, Sawabona and Absai have a healing circle that's going on for Black women. And then they also have healing circles that are being presented by OHA, which is Oregon Health Authority, for Black women as well. So my question is, how do we get these state legislators to look at healing circles as proper deflection programs that will work, where we can offer these and get away from that carceral coercion way? And I'm curious if you speak to that at all in your book.
That's why I'm smiling right now. What chapter? We got chapter for you. We got chapter by John Key Samuels IV. He has an entire study that he did, a review of different African-centered diversion programs and their success relative to standard diversion programs. And it should be of no surprise that he finds them to be highly successful alternatives, right? And so we have the evidence that's there. Kelechi also names in her review of community-based leaders that she does, community-based healing circles as another successful alternative as a form of diversion. So we have two pieces, like two studies that are evidence for people to use. What I've also found in my experience, I'm curious about your experience, is even now at the highest level, right? When we're talking about this warfare that's being engaged in the media, for example, people are discarding all these programs. People are advocating for policing. The lower you go, right, the more community-based you get, people I find are a bit more honest about what works and what doesn't work for their people and for their community. And I've been surprised, even under Trump, that we're having conversations with local legislatures. We have some contracts that we're doing in Baltimore, some work that we're doing in some people in DC. And again, even people supporting the work that we're doing in Haiti because they know what works and what doesn't work, right? Lawrence Grand Prix with the Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle in Baltimore, they have a great podcast and a great study demonstrating, again, this exact thing. These culturally grounded programs are much more effective and much more safe for the community. So that's why I would say I think it's real grassroots local politics, speaking to people, because people in community know what works. They might be lying at the national stage and even at the state stage. The more local you go, people are more honest. I've found so far.
Evan, I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about the role that we can have as Maroon psychologists. I was at a workshop this summer at our convention with Dr. Tania Lodge, and she was talking about, I know she's one of the contributors to your book, and I know she was talking about ways in which we can give, the people who are doing the decision making in the carceral system a different perspective on the causation and how they might respond to dealing with the problems that they see in courtroom.
Yeah, so there's 2 chapters that go together for this, or maybe 3. One of is Dr. Tania Lodge's chapter, which is absolutely brilliant. If you got the chance to see her presentation at ABC, I think it really gripped people. Dr. Lodge was able to evidence through her practice. That's what I want to name again. All the things that we're talking about, I want to be very sure were materially done, right? We're not talking about, we got Baba Naeem. This is so dope. And also want to shout out Dr. Shah Utsi. Dr. Shah Utsi was supposed to be on the forward, but he's doing a lot of great work. So shout out Dr. Shah Utsi also. So Dr. Lodge was able to demonstrate how the usage of a variety of African-centered based assessments were able to more completely demonstrate the psychological picture of the people that she was in court advocating for. And so a lot of people were kind of surprised at the effectiveness of this. But in my doing research for the book, looking for contributors, I spoke to a lot of different people, a lot of different Black African-centered psychologists who named using these tools in, whether it be in formulations, however it be, in court-based settings, was actually highly effective. What I want to name also what made these pieces effective, and this is going back to some of the ancestral work, when you look at the success of Thomas Hilliard and the Black psychologists advocating for Angela Davis, or all the way to South Africa. When you look at what South Africa is, one of the first Black psychologists operating in South Africa, N.C. Mangyani, doing his forensic evaluations for Black people during apartheid. What made all of these effective is that they happened in the context of grassroots movement, right? It made the state understand the courtroom to be a central place of warfare, that if we get this wrong in a demonstrable way, this could bleed out into the streets. And so placing the community, placing an eye on the courtroom and making it be known that we still want our community-based justice enabled a lot of these evaluations to be effective, right? Ansi Mangyani, again, a Black psychologist in apartheid South Africa, is able to successfully get a number of freedom fighters off death row because, in part, of a lot of the grassroots resistance that was going on. And so that's what I would say is our work has to be both informed by our science that, again, all of y'all have laid the foundation for, but also has to occur within the context of larger grassroots movement, is what I would say.
I just want to give a shameless plug to Dr. Tania Lodge, who just started a training on optimal psychology coaching, and she uses it in her kindred spirit, behavioral health. And prior to her, the Minority Behavioral Health Group in Akron has been using it. So we know it's effective when we come to people with culturally congruent and synchronic approaches. And those who might be interested in training, that's going to go. The first iteration has gone on. It started last month, go on for 4 months. But I'm sure we'll be coming back again. So those who want training in that, it's becoming available.
Dr. Jojo, do we have any questions? But also shout out to all that also. I had to write to every contributor as they were writing. I was like, you got to talk that one book chapter, that one article you have, Nana Linda, on optimal theories, contributions to global human flourishing. I was like, you got to throw this in. Y'all got to cite this. Like, you can't do that side in this. It's so good.
We had one question. So I'm going to, Dr. Anwanga, I'm going to read the question. But I was actually typing a response as as you were asking me that, Dr. August. So somebody said, why do religious people hate you guys so much? I've been trying to get these people in here. Only thing they can put together is that you doctors are lying. I'm so perplexed. I guess my question is, how do I show them they're wrong about African-centered consciousness? And I was responding that, right, we unfortunately can't force people's consciousness. We can expose them to our version of the truth and our moral and religious, or our moral and spiritual systems, but we can't force them to like hear what we're saying unless they want to. But I don't know if anybody else has a response.
Another shameless plug. I have used Christian religion as a segue from the African-centered optimal theory of human development. And we have ongoing meditation weekly using Blessed Assurance with a safe Black space in Sacramento. And we average probably between 20 and 25 people a week. And many of them are religious. So I don't think all religious people would hate African-centered consciousness, because if they knew the roots of the Christianity they so embrace, they would know that it's emerging from an African-centered consciousness. So I think that that's kind of a gap we can close, or will be closed, as people are really forced to see the impact of that mindset that claims, for example, with all the dehumanization and racism taking place today in the name of Christianity, the Christian right, or whatever they call themselves.
That's it. I was thinking 2 to 3 things. One of which, there's a really powerful study that I love. Bonnie Kaiser over at Duke did it in Haiti, where she looked at what services people were willing to engage in Haiti. And this is in the context which everybody says, oh, Haitian people have a stigma against mental health. And she did this study in which she like watched the service that people were willing to use, and if it was available, people would use it, right? Whether it was the church, whether it was the Ugon, whether it was the mental health practitioner, because at the end of the day, people wanted health, wellness, and security. So I would say, I think the first thing I always go to is, I think it's on us to be of service to the people. It's us to demonstrate that we are of use, that we can help people in their day-to-day lives in a material way, especially right now. So I would put the onus on us to be valuable to people. The second piece I would say is, I think it's always a work of translation. As Nana Linda said, like, there's a lot of people who hear African and they think something else completely. But again, like, Blessed Assurance is a great example of how you show the threads, the connections of all these different ways of practice and ways of engaging in faith. And the third one is, this goes all the way back to Asa Hilliard saying that not all people who were enslaved wanted freedom. I'm not saying everybody who's specifically engaged in the church is enslaved at all, but I'm saying people have very different political visions, and that's also fine. Like, that's also okay. There are going to always be some people that do not want to engage with the way that you envision liberation, that do not want to engage with your form of politics. And in some ways, I think that might be healthy. I think Amos Wilson talks about, you need a diversity of political thought, right, for any life species to thrive. And so as long as we're serving the people who we are committed to, are demonstrating our value to community, I think that's all we can do.
I think the more knowledgeable people become, the more they realize that it's all interconnected and interrelated and interdependent. So I think the key is having an open mind and pursuing knowledge, our love of learning. Something popped up on the screen. I couldn't read it quickly enough.
There we go. That's my guy. Tyke's been on this, I think, a couple of times.
Tarek says, been struggling with what Joy James called the captive maternal. Basically, this idea that we who are vulnerable to and do care work in rebellion against structural abandonment and violence against our people also have this labor stolen to stabilize the very structures that prey on us, since we're filling in the gaps. Wondering what your thoughts are on navigating this tension.
I have thoughts, but I've also been rambling a little bit. So if anybody else has reflections.
I think I don't have an answer to this. I just have a thought, an extension to that, and to what you said earlier, Will, about the gap. And also you mentioned without giving away the secret sauce, right? So my thought and connection to that is it's hard, I think, doing this work because there are people who will catch on to the movement or whatever it is once they realize, like, oh, shoot, I'm on the wrong side of history, is where my mind is going. And now try to maybe catch up or do things to self correct or join along as if it's like a trend and things like that. There's also an element of potential ego, I think, that comes in with some of the work that is done in this space because people do feel like, oh, there should be certain leaders that are followed, or there should be a direction or how we should do it. And as you know, Evan just said, that people are going to have different perspectives on how to approach it. Like, we're all Black, but we're not all the same person. We haven't had the same upbringing. We have different theoretical views. And even within AB Sci, we sit and talk about our differing perspectives on how to approach things. And we have maybe the same end goal, hopefully, which is, you know, Black liberation. And we talk about the mission of AB Sci, but to the point of, ego, and then the labor and the gap and all those things, I think at a certain point, some of that stuff is out of our control. Like, we're not able to control, like, who takes credit for certain things and the impact that can have. I think in some ways we are responsible for making sure that we're very clear as individuals when we do our work, and then as a collective, if we're coming, you know, through the Association of Black Psychologists or whatever, on what our mission is and what our approach is, so that people don't take what we say and now like misconstrue it. But because we live in a world of individuals who just are going to do their own thing, I think it's hard for me to think about whether there's a right way to navigate that. And I know that's not what you're asking, Tariq, but thinking about the right way to navigate it, from my perspective, part of that is just doing the work from a very pure and genuine place, and making sure that we are checking in with our community about what's needed. One of the big things about being in academia we talk about is that disconnection to the people and what the people actually need. But getting in those spaces, sometimes we also have to remind ourselves that we're sometimes we're a little bit removed. So we always got to be tapping back in, like, that community participatory type of style. Like, we're also not immune to contributing to the harm when we are in these spaces that are so, I guess, like, privileged in a way, or protected. But yeah, the way that I think about navigating it is just from an authentic place. Like, knowing what your mission is and how you want to contribute to the liberation movement, and doing that in a way that you can be proud to say that I'm honoring my ancestors in this way, as opposed to focusing too much on the people who are stealing it. Because if they're stealing, then they're probably not contributing to the movement in a way that God or the divine is actually calling them to do it. So they might not really be, helping the process. It seems like a little bit less authentic when it's done in that way.
Dr. August, would you like to share your thoughts? I know we're running out of time, and I don't know when you'll be back. So
yeah, I'll say, like, really quickly. And that's my guy, so we could also text. What I was going to say is, because of that, the way that shaped part of the book project, for example, is there are a lot of people who want to write chapters, for instance, on the healing circle work that they were doing in prisons. And I noted, I think that's really powerful work, but in some ways, while that's work in service to helping people deal with the weight of violence of carceral-based settings, in some ways that does optimize the very system that we're seeking to abolish, right? And being really clear, right? Not everybody wants to abolish the system, and this work was done in part through an abolitionist lens, right? And so because of that, the work that we wanted to uplift was work that moved towards how do we get people out very clearly? How do we create other types of structures very clearly? And how do we continue to advocate for the abolition of these very systems, right? Dr. Cheryl Gross has a great book along with Dr. Robin Douglas on reparatory justice and how that connects to abolition as well. So that's what I would say, right, is I think some people fall capture to, I believe Amos Wilson talks about this. I believe Ezebo writes about this sometimes, where people can become highly reactive to their context as opposed to being strategic enough to create the events that they want. And so how do we move from a reactive to a proactive politics? And so that's the distinction I make. And I think when you don't do that, you do risk what Joy James names. And even in your work of, which is important, right, helping people deal with the weight of violence, you can be nonetheless maintaining the structures that we're fighting against.
Can you give an example of that?
So that's one of the examples that I was thinking about, right? Is people who might do maybe, right? Depends on the lens that they're doing it. When I don't want to cast paint with the biggest brush, but I might think about people who do, right, healing circles, right, as their radical practice, like the healing circles in the confines of a prison that becomes a part of like the programming. As an example, I would say that's one that holds that really difficult balance, in that it's doing the good work of making people who are incarcerated feel good about just the weight of violence that they're dealing with, but it does help that system maintain. Right now, you're a part of standard programming for that system that helps people move through it. Right?
What would the alternative be? Let them fester and die?
Fester or die? No, so that's what I was naming, right? So when I was speaking with people at the Decolonial Black Psychology Conference, what I named was not necessarily that we stop doing any type of specific work, but where almost like what keys do we need to be playing more of? There are so many of us, and not everybody needs to be doing the same thing. And what I noticed a lot of my conversations, for instance, most people were coming to me with, well, I do a lot of this work in the prison. And so my response to that was, that's beautiful work. We also need to be doing more of this work outside. Right? I had a lot of people come to me and say, well, I do this work with this jail, with this police department. I'll say that's fantastic. We need to be doing more of this work with grassroots space activists. So it's not a call to abandon anybody in a particular place or a particular type of work, but how in our collective can we shift our focus, again, to affect our long-term outcomes.
And I know you haven't, so I knew the answer to that question, but I don't know that everybody in our audience did. It's so important not to get trapped into an either or kind of reasoning. It's always going to be both and. And I think in terms of the question about preventing the people's whose cultural tradition is to discover something people have already been doing and claim it as their own, you can't stop that. That's endemic to their cultural worldview. I think we could better serve ourselves by putting our attention on the secret sauce, which can't be stolen. You can get so far and then it's like, no, back up. So anyway, just want to throw that out before we leave today. You all have been wonderful. We miss you, Evan. We're so glad to have you back. And to all the rest of our panelists, so much grace you have given. And our audience, we just love you so much. Peace and continued blessings.
Can we drop the book in the comments before folks, or like a link to get the book?